Some initial thoughts on Ralph Waldo Emerson's biography. I'm not fully done yet. I think I'm about 85% through. And I want to talk about two things here. One is poetry itself, or the art of compression, which is really the art of intelligence, or this is a manifestation of intelligence. And then what it actually means in an Emersonian context, what intelligence even means, mind, human intelligence, all these things that are being thrown around now for various reasons in the age of AI and AGI, artificial general intelligence, or super intelligence, or whatever you want to call these types of things that are all kind of going towards the ability to do things better than humans or like humans. And I think Emerson would have a few words to say about that. This is not even on podcast. It's September 16, 2025. This is Crim Delco. For the day, the fund is up 1.5%. The market is flat for the year. We are up roughly 10%. The market's up 11%. We're underperforming by 1%. So Ralph Waldo Emerson's biography is really a very nice experience for me. I've not read about poets themselves. One of the books I read a long time ago about a writer was An Empire of His Own, which is the biography of Gore Vidal. And I think that's, as far as I remember, I read something about Orwell, but I tend to obviously read people and not necessarily read about people when they're writers. But this is a very interesting introduction. I haven't worked too much with poetry in my life. All the way back, I'm German educated with Goethe and Schiller. I definitely was exposed to poetry at the highest level, but I didn't understand it back in high school. And then later on, I read a lot of Hesse and then Thomas Mann, which, although they write prose, I would say there's very, very thin line between prose and poetry with these types of writers. On the English side, I would say I'm more of a practical person when it comes to writers. My favorite writers are Steinbeck and Malm and Hemingway, and I wouldn't necessarily call them poets. So this was an introduction to poetry for me, which I really appreciate in many ways. It opened my horizon to the art of compression. It's also coincidental, or maybe not, but with the work I'm doing professionally, we're working on intelligence. I was going to say we're working on AGI. I don't want to say that, but we're working on the idea of building an agent that can be intelligent and increase its intelligence as a function of compute, which basically means super intelligence, because if that happens, it's almost obvious that an agent like that will start pursuing goals that are way beyond what we know today. For example, new science and also new ways to solve problems that we will call super intelligence. But back to the actual point, which is compression and poetry, and that's the first thing I want to talk about. It's just astonishing how well Emerson was versed with words, and particularly his ability to express profound ideas in very short verses it's just astonishing. I mean, I lack the words to express what I find so amazing about words, and maybe that's a good alien inconsistency right there. But my point again, shortness, consistency, Kolmogorov complexity is defined as the shortest string that defines another string. I mean, this is all one, right? This is Platonic, and I'm really excited about that. So I'm definitely going to work more on poetry, and I think it's. I've said that many times here at the Not Even Wrong podcast. The purpose of this podcast is to give people a sense for what it feels like to run a hedge fund. And you might ask, okay, what does Ralph Waldo Emerson have to do with running a hedge fund? And the answer is always the same: nothing and everything. Certainly not directly. Emerson was not predicting the next big thing. He was certainly not in the business of understanding the differences between NVIDIA and Broadcom. or how Tesla's FSD will proliferate into a massive business. But he had this universal ability to focus on what's really relevant. And what's relevant in business, science, and philosophy is the human, is the actual input that we make, our minds make into shaping our environment. And it's the passion and the desire. Nothing has ever happened, nothing good has ever happened without enthusiasm. This is one of his quotes. I've made many notes in this lecture, so I'm going to try to summarize this book maybe a bit more formally, or actually I'm going to write an essay about it. I think it's more productive. But what I want to say here is, again, I think I can't emphasize enough how useful and important it is to grasp some of the writings that poets such as Emerson have left us with. And how you do it, and this would be something Ralph Waldo Emerson subscribes to, how you actually interpret it and how you do it, that is up to you. You know, there is, everybody is a Shakespeare on their own, because it is how we let Shakespeare into our own soul and our own mind, and how we interpret Shakespeare, that really gives the power of Shakespeare. And what's so artistic about Shakespeare is that he touches so many souls or so many minds, and that's what art really is. That's art in essence. If you want a definition of art, it's a volumetric definition. How many souls do you touch? And if you don't touch many souls, you're not a good artist. That's it. Now, there could be a timing issue like Van Gogh. It might take some time for you to actually touch the souls, but you better touch those souls at some point. And I would even add that you need to get paid, either with money or with fame or something. If nobody cares about your art, you're not an artist. So that's my opinion. I think Emerson would agree with that. And the reason I say that is because art is a reflection of our society. And only if you can integrate your work with society, you have value. And if you don't have value, you really don't matter. And that's kind of, I think that's what Emerson would subscribe to. It's originality, it's Peter Thiel 0 to 1, the same way Thiel looks at an entrepreneur and wants originality in her, and this drive and this courage. That's exactly what Emerson wants from a poet. So there's these parallels are striking and really exciting. I think poetry is probably the ultimate manifestation of human intelligence, because verbal expression is one of our trademarks in the competition of life forms, and poetry is the least Kolmogorov complex way to express certain concepts, and therefore the most intelligent way to express concepts. So it's the highest form of intelligence that humans can achieve. And I think, again, Emerson would agree with that. The other thing I want to talk about here in this, soft review of Emerson's biography is the thought of self-reliance and the individual at the core of the universe. I think Emerson is the intellectual declaration of independence from European and Western thought, but it's not necessarily a declaration of independence in the sense that we're just cutting the cord and going our own way. This is not your Bolshevik revolution. He is incredibly deeply embedded with Western culture. I think what he does, he just turns the page and he says that the teachings of Jesus, and by the way, other Eastern cultures and Hebrew culture and pretty much any culture that matters to us humans, Hellenic, Egypt, Phoenicians, all the way back, the classics, Gilgamesh, you name it, they are relevant to us because they represent a Platonic representation of intelligence, of nature. And it's the human individual spirit or soul that grasps that and manifests it in his or her way. So while there is a Platonic representation of reality, we call it nature or we can call it intelligence, it's the individual expression of that reality, the way this sort of morphs your algorithm, which is important and interesting. In that sense, I see Emerson as a prelude to a David Deutsch, for example, who says that, you know, the value of a human is really orthogonal to the masses. Like, you want to be different, in other words, to be valuable, because that's who you are. Like your footprint, your handwriting, the you in what you do is what matters. Nothing else matters. And you can express that with intellect or passion, and there's actually no difference between intellect and passion. It's all one manifestation. So there's a lot of knowledge that is compressed here. There is, I would say, even the elephant rider with the idea, Jonathan Haidt's idea that we really are, our frontal cortex is just one part of our intelligence. So there's many other things in our nervous system, many other manifestations of intelligence, of knowledge that manifest themselves with us. So that's Peter Thiel again. Like, it's your unique view of the world. There might be a universal truth out there, but it's your unique interpretation. There is no such thing as science. There are only scientists. There is no such thing as entrepreneurship. There are only entrepreneurs, each one on their own. Every happy entrepreneur is happy in his or her own way. Every happy scientist, ... And every unhappy entrepreneur is unhappy in a common way. So because they're not unique, because they're imitating. Imitation is a death sentence. Unique originality is the source of life. So these are the kinds of things that stuck out to me. There's a lot more. This is a long tome. There's certainly more to say. There's a political aspect to Emerson, the abolitionist fight in the 1850s that led to the Civil War. There is, the Declaration of Independence from Britain in terms of intellectual heritage, certainly worth talking about, because it's very interesting how the thought, century-old thought from Britain, habeas corpus, the Shakespeare, and the foundation of Western thought, all of these things culminate in the American Revolution on U.S. soil, and then kind of splinter out, and then people like Emerson pick up the pieces and turn these valuable pieces of knowledge and philosophy into an American version of philosophy. There is Emerson, then Melville writes Moby Dick, which is the ultimate novel of the 19th century, the can-do, conquering nature, the fight against nature and authority. And then the robber barons turn this country into an industrial powerhouse to launch the 20th century. So that's now, in hindsight, we see where that all ended up. At least we see where we are today. And there's a whole other conversation we could have about where we stand today and how that relates to Emerson. I want to do a special episode about that, because I think that's important. And that's another thing Emerson would say, is that the value of history is the way we reflect our present in our ancestry. And I think it's incredibly valuable to know how our literary history, how our, let's say, liberal arts colleges evolved in the 19th century to become what they are today. And some might argue it's not a good situation right now. We have censorship, we have extreme left-wing activism, we have murders, like Charlie Kirk's murder on a campus. So there is no freedom on our campuses, and that was not the case in the 19th century, where the doors were open to abolitionists, to female supporters of women's rights, and male supporters of women's rights. So we're turning the door now. We're turning we're closing the door. Sorry, which is a very bad thing. But again, I think that's worth a whole episode on its own. I think I want to stop here now and again just mention the value of poetry as the most concise form of intelligence humans can express, or one of them, and the value of Emerson's thoughts as the foundation of American individualism, of American can-do culture, and in my opinion, are the underpinnings of freedom and liberty across the world, because we are the only carrier of that flag. Nobody else carries the flag of freedom and liberty in the world. Even Europe, nobody else has that type of intellectual heritage like we have here in the United States. And therefore, I think people like Ralph Waldo Emerson are massively important for the future of our country. Thank you.